Thank you all for joining us. I'm Josh Mahoney with DERM's External Affairs Division. I'm going to go over to housekeeping for this webinar. This webinar is being recorded. The presentation and the webinar recording will be made available by request made to DERM@miamidade.gov. For attendees, for all of you all here tonight, your microphone should be muted during the webinar. Please submit your questions and comments in the Q&A chat. Questions and comments will be addressed in the chat or during the Q&A session after the presentations. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome our moderator, Loren Parra.
Thank you, Josh. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of Mayor Daniella Levine Cava's Extreme Heat and Biscayne Bay Roundtable series. My name is Loren Parra. I'm the director of Miami-Dade County's Department of Environmental Resources Management, better known as DERM, and I'm very pleased to moderate tonight's discussion. Of course, we want to start by recognizing our Miami-Dade County Mayor, Daniella Levine Cava, our panelists, community partners, and all of the residents who are joining us this evening. Tonight, we will discuss how extreme heat is impacting the health of the ecosystem of Biscayne Bay, and very specifically our coral reef system. Our panelists are going to share their insights on how we're monitoring temperatures and nutrient loads, as well as other key metrics to plan and prepare for continued rising temperatures. We'll be discussing how Miami-Dade County is assessing where we stand and how we take action to protect our environment through the coordinated work of both DERM, but also the incredible external partners across our community, including tonight's panelists from the University of Miami, Nova Southeastern University, and Florida Sea Grant. This series is truly a reflection of our mayor's strong commitment to resilience, to environmental protection, and her leadership to ensure that we are using sound science, collaboration, and community partnership to guide all that we do. So it is my great pleasure to welcome our Mayor, Daniella Levine Cava. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I'm really thrilled to be with all of you tonight. Thank you for joining on a Friday night, an unusual time, probably my doing, because time is very limited between our budget briefings. And actually, I take a short vacation next week, so yay for me. I'll be rafting on the Middle Fork of the Salmon River for all of you folks who love to do that sort of activity. But anyway, I'm very happy to be with you tonight and so glad that you could join. I want to make sure that we all acknowledge that this roundtable is a reflection of our collaboration. It's not obviously the counties alone. It's something we must all do together. We have to work diligently each and every day to protect our residents and the entire ecosystem of Biscayne Bay, including our precious coral reefs. And I want to acknowledge particularly the community partners who are joining us this evening, specifically academic and nonprofit institutions that play such a leading role, the University of Miami, the Nova Southeastern University, and Florida Sea Grant, all reflected on our panel. And the collaboration of so many municipal partners is also key. And many are joining us this evening. So thank you for your ongoing commitment, and to all of the nonprofits and advocates who've joined us. You're key. You're the movement. Thank you. This is the second part. As you know, I hope others, you've heard the first part, and it's available as well, if not. And it is our Extreme Heat and Biscayne Bay Roundtable series. We've done this over a few years. Clearly, we're all concerned about the fate of the Bay. We've issued so many heat advisories. I don't know if you're getting yours. I'm getting mine. And in fact, we are double the rate of last summer in terms of the number of days of extreme heat advisory. It is obviously a growing challenge. It's just going to continue on an upward track. A couple of weeks ago, we discussed the impacts that extreme heat is having on our residents. The impacts are having on our residents, our visitors, and our local residents, as well as on local businesses, as well as on Biscayne Bay. And we looked at the great work that was being done across our county to protect the lives and the livelihoods throughout the region. And now for part 2, we're turning our focus to the Bay specifically, and all of the precious wildlife and habitat that depend on the health of this unique ecosystem. We've got local experts who are going to share what they're seeing through their monitoring efforts, the actions they're taking, and the strategy the county and our external partners are advancing to protect the bay and our reefs during the extreme heat season. It includes outstanding research that's being done at our local academic institutions and nonprofits. So it's just as important as our goal to respond to extreme heat, even as we aim to prepare in advance for a warming planet. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us on a Friday night. I look forward to the discussion, and I'll be closing later after the panel and the discussion. Thank you. Back to you, Loren.
Thank you, Mayor. And with that, we will move on to introduce each of our incredible panelists. So first, we have Laura Eldredge. She is our Restoration and Enhancement Section Manager for DERM's Water Resources Coordination Division. She currently manages a team of scientists who work to monitor, enhance, and restore the submerged and coastal habitats within and species within county waters. Thank you, Laura, for joining us. We also have Dr. Brian Walker, who is a research program director at Nova Southeastern University's Halmos College of Natural Sciences and Oceanography. He leads a team that studies how environmental stressors affect reef conditions and corals. Next, we have Dalton Hesley, who is a senior research associate in Dr. Diego Lerman's Coral Restoration Lab at the University of Miami. He also directs Rescue a Reef, which is the lab citizen science program designed to advance coral reef restoration through education, outreach, and public participation. And last but certainly not least, we have Allison Holyvote. She is the Florida Coral Reef Resilience Program Coordinator for Florida Sea Grant, which is a statewide collaborative public-private partnership, which is focused on restoring Florida's coral reef to a resilient, self-sustaining ecosystem. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Now, I'm going to get us started here with our first topic of the evening, which is going to be the status of corals in Biscayne Bay. So my first question is going to be to Laura. Laura, can you please tell us about DERM's recent bay and offshore monitoring projects and what DERM does and how that stacks up across time?
Yeah, of course. And welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on a Friday night. Thank you, Loren, as our director. Thanks to our mayor for really calling this out and wanting to call attention to the health of our bay and our reefs. I'm lucky enough to manage a team of 22 biologists and cadastrals within the county who work to protect, monitor, restore, and enhance the species and habitats within our surface waters and along the coastal edge. You see a few great, wonderful, happy pictures here today. The team I lead has been in existence since the 1970s. So many of our monitoring projects have been collecting data on Biscayne Bay and on our reefs for almost 50 years now. We have marine debris program, habitat restoration, mangrove monitoring and plantings, artificial and natural reef monitoring, surface water quality monitoring, seagrass and sponge monitoring, fisheries independent studies, habitat enhancements, manatees and bird surveys, and everything else in between. But to focus on more recent efforts, we can move to the next slide. So this is just a little sampling of the last couple of weeks of what your DERM staff in my section has sampled for water temperature specifically. So including our monthly surface water quality monitoring project that's been running since 1979, you see in the red. Some additional samples from our submerged aquatic vegetation team monitoring, including a macroalgal growth project off Coral Gables in the green. We're also testing out the ability of a new offshore water quality program seen in the yellow. And in the purple is a project called Eyes on the Bay, which surveys North Biscayne Bay sites weekly for an additional monitoring during the summer months when we want to have more data in the area where we've seen heat stress, fish kills, and algal blooms for a few years now. Next slide. So to zoom in on what some of those temperature data actually looks like, we've got some points here, some numbers, surface and bottom depths within the bay on the left, and some offshore for those projects I mentioned on the right. You can click ahead, Josh, thank you. The red boxes that you're seeing pop up here for our offshore waters, that's really calling out what we've seen this week for the temperature thresholds that are above what we call local coral bleaching threshold. Now, globally, NOAA, our federal government, considers that global threshold to be about 30.8 degrees Celsius. However, as we've known from our science, specifically Manzello et al. In 2007, we know that within Florida waters, the bleaching threshold is actually slightly lower at 30.5 degrees Celsius. And I know some of you don't know what that means. That actually means 86.9 degrees Fahrenheit. So these are the sites in the red that we're actually seeing the opportunity for corals to be under threat for bleaching on this day that we were out in the water this week. Now, those temperatures can be changing as of today, as we know that our temperatures are ephemeral and they're changing from day to day. But we do know that they're still under threat within these areas, especially if temperatures sustain themselves across time. And that's just a little snapshot.
Thank you, Laura. My next question is for Dalton. We're going to take it over to University of Miami now. What are you seeing through your work at the UM's Coral Restoration Lab?
Thank you, Loren. Yeah, coincidentally, our team was actually underwater earlier today, so I feel I can give you the most up-to-date information on the status of coral reefs. And truthfully, it's not amazing in that pretty consistently here, each of the last handful of summers around this time, we've kind of breached that threshold that Laura was talking about, and that's stressful for corals. And that's where you might have heard of this phenomenon called coral bleaching. That's really just them on the brink. They're being overwhelmed by that heat stress. So today offshore, we did observe that. We're seeing our corals paling, where they're losing some of that color, and we're seeing some of the coral colonies fully bleached. The good news is, though, there's two good news. First is there wasn't any recent mortality, so that means that they haven't been overwhelmed to the point that they actually die off. And temperatures were only 86 degrees today. So that is just under their upper bound. But it is important because earlier in June and July, as we've been monitoring these sites, they have been in excess. So these corals are feeling that ocean temperature heat stress that's caused it. But even a slight breather like they're having right now can be life or death for them. So we're not out of the woods yet, but it is a point of encouragement. And it's because of stressors like this that our lab does the work that it does. So for anyone that hasn't heard of coral gardening and reef restoration before, it's really exactly how it sounds. We're essentially underwater coral farmers. So we'll grow branching corals, brain corals, star corals, essentially, a good majority of the corals that you'll find locally in either underwater gardens or nurseries, or land-based gardens or nurseries. And as long as those corals are housed in the right environmental conditions, they're going to do pretty well. So Dr. Lehrman started this lab probably 20 years ago. And over that time, we've worked to collect small pieces from the wild, move them to these underwater or land-based nurseries to grow them, and then essentially farm, where as they get larger, you can refragment them, create more pieces, and then that creates a really powerful platform for both research, advancing the science around corals, but also restoration. So that's what you can actually see in these photos here are corals that we had gardened and then planted back onto local reefs. So that's really what our team does is over time, we continually monitor the different stressors facing corals, which we'll talk a bit more about later. And then through gardening and reef restoration, we try and better understand why. Why do some corals grow faster? Why are some disease resistant? Why are some thermally tolerant, kind of heat ready? So that through restoration, we can create blueprints for the most, kind of climate ready reef restoration site. So that, we'll get into more of the ins and outs throughout this conversation. But it is kind of critical that we're having the conversation right now because our corals are experiencing that heat stress. So it makes it a really top of mind topic. But thankfully, there are things to do that we'll get into a little later.
Thanks so much for that, Dalton. I think everyone here is certainly thinking through how to get themselves climate ready, and it's nice to know that someone's worrying about the corals to get them climate ready too. Okay, so next up we'll go to Brian, to Dr. Walker. Brian, what are you seeing through your work at Nova Southeastern University?
Thanks, Lauren. I wanted to take a step back in time and a little bit look from a high altitude and get an understanding of put this temperature stress into context, because this is talking about uh, extreme heat, and I just wanted to show people how we got here a little bit. So, in talking about the historic temperature, this graph shows the top lines on this graph, the black and purple, show sea surface temperature over the last I don't know, many decades. And the purple parts in those lines are times when there were global coral bleaching events. That means throughout the ocean basins, corals bleached in all the ocean basins because of temperature stress. And as you can see from this chart, the temperatures, although they fluctuate from year to year, they all go up, right? So we have this upward trend in our temperatures, and you can see now that the lowest temperatures that we experience are higher than the highest temperatures in the past. Next slide. So what this means for corals is temperature stress. It's not only about the amount of temperature, but it's the length of time where they're exposed to that temperature. And so in these global bleaching events, we can see that the first one started relatively, it seems relatively small in this graph, but it was a massive deal at the time. Millions of corals were lost throughout the world. And then time went by and it didn't seem to happen for a while. But now over the past 2 decades, they've gotten much more frequent. We've had 3 global bleaching events in the past 15 years, and they've gotten longer in duration. So we're seeing this exponential increase in temperature stress over time on coral reefs globally, which is really, really alarming. Next slide. So locally, this was as of 2 days ago, August 12th. NOAA has a program called Coral Reef Watch, and they use satellites to determine sea surface temperatures. And they monitor those sea surface temperatures over the globe to calculate and estimate the amount of time corals spend at a given temperature range. And then they set up alert levels for, like, if corals experience a certain temperature threshold for a couple weeks, they have an alert level. So right now, you can see Biscayne Bay and most of the Keys in Florida Bay are all in alert level 2. Alert level 2 means that they've been in bleaching temperatures or threshold bleaching temperatures for 8 weeks. Next slide. If we look at the historical temperatures from this data set over time, the black line at the top shows the temperatures this year, and all the other colored lines are from subsequent years past. And you can see that the bluish purple ones are kind of at the bottom of that spaghetti, but then all the red ones are at the top, and the red ones are the most recent. And the black one is this year is in particular one of the hottest ever recorded. And that's not only in Florida, but globally. It's predicted to be the hottest ocean temperatures ever recorded. But we can see at the bottom graph is showing the amount of time that corals have been exposed to a bleaching threshold temperature. And we can see that the black line has already reached this 8-degree heating weeks, essentially the earliest that it's ever been recorded. So that means that they've already experienced a lot of heat stress that normally wouldn't happen until middle August or later. Next slide. So what happens when this heat stress hits? Well, these are examples from 2023 in a recent paper from Dr. Manzello. And what you get is our corals. They're a beautiful, healthy coral reef that bleaches completely, which are the middle pictures, and then dies, which are the pictures on the right. And this occurred over the course of a couple of months in 2023. The top row is from the lower Keys, and the bottom row is off Key Largo. So we can see that these have devastating effects on corals. And I would argue that if this hadn't happened in 2023, it would be happening right now. But those corals don't exist anymore, so we don't see it. Next slide. And in that paper, he identified the mortality of these corals, specifically these acropora corals that are heat sensitive. And the red bars indicate the amount of mortality, or the number of corals that died, the percentage of corals that died. And throughout the lower Keys and middle Keys, nearly 100% of this species died during that 2023 bleaching event. But what's interesting is we can see as we go north off Biscayne and then into Broward and Miami, we saw the mortality drop, right? All the corals didn't die. Some of them still survived. So they may have bleached, but they didn't die. And that's an interesting aspect of our region, is that it's possible that this is an indicator that although it's hot out there, it may still be a refuge from the extreme heat that they're seeing further south. Next slide. And in 2023, just to follow that up, this map shows maps of corals that we've been monitoring for the last 8 years. And in 2023, we went and we were monitoring them in August, and we found that only the corals south of Government Cut fully bleached or partially bleached, and none of the corals north of Government Cut bleached. So there's a possibility in this region that there's a buffering effect of temperature where these corals might actually see a little bit of a refuge off Miami Beach and areas further north. And I'll talk more about the implications of that later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walker. And now we're going to pass it to Allison, and we're hoping you can give us the same point of view. What are you seeing as Florida's Coral Reef Resilience Program Coordinator? What's the point of view from where you're seated?
Yeah, thank you, Loren, and good evening to everyone joining today. I just want to provide a little bit of context first for those who aren't familiar with Florida's Coral Reef Resilience Program. So as Loren had mentioned earlier, our program is really a statewide, highly collaborative public-private partnership to help get the reefs back to where they need to be. And so while the panelists before me did a really great job of talking about what they're seeing on the reefs currently, as they are our eyes and ears in the water, I kind of wanted to take a little bit of a step back and talk about the people aspect. What are we seeing in terms of the people who are helping get these corals climate ready? So the FCRRP, Florida's Coral Reef Resilience Program, has a few different interconnected parts. The first is that our leadership bodies within the FCRRP are led by 4 agencies: NOAA, Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, National Park Service, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, as well as Florida's Department of Environmental Protection. And in these leadership roles, they provide guidance on what our organization should be working on, where are our efforts best put, and we come up with the ideas around goal setting and what the future holds for our program, as well as the state. And then in addition to that, as the other panelists here are a part of, there's a much greater FCRRP community. And this community consists of researchers, organizations, students, resource managers, basically anyone who wants to be a part of the program can be. And I know it can get a little bit confusing, right? Because there's lots of different programs and everyone's doing something a little different, but the FCRRP is built to act kind of like the umbrella above it all, right? Not to displace anything, not to push anyone out or duplicate too many efforts, but instead to coordinate and make cohesive the works that is happening along Florida's coral reef. And so the photo that you're seeing here is actually what it looks like when you go to our webpage, fcrrp.org. I suggest checking it out because it goes much more into depth of the work we do and the partners that we work with on a regular basis. But back to your question, Loren, what am I seeing from my side of things? I really think that what's happening in Southeast Florida is two-pronged. The first is that with our agency leadership within the FCRP, I'm seeing a tremendous amount of consistent and deliberate communication and collaboration. And that includes sharing information and resources whenever we can. Brian had mentioned future events and where we stood kind of in the past in terms of heat stress. And one of the biggest lessons we've learned from the disturbance events Florida's coral reef has had over the few years is that communication and collaboration are critical, not just during an event, but before the event, during the recovery process. And that is especially true here, since we're talking about Biscayne Bay, where we continue to see strong and ongoing collaboration between partners there, as well as the National Park Service and Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, all along the bottom part of Florida, where heat stress is the highest right now. The other prong to what I'm seeing in Florida right now is within our broader FCRRP network. While many people, like myself, spend a lot of time coordinating from behind a desk, folks like the other panelists on their call are in the water, maybe with their physical bodies, but also with their instruments and their ways of measuring what is happening at our reef sites. And so while I can't get out and physically tell you what's going on to the reef, we have created a really strong network of folks who can. And so what we do is try and connect with those folks, build relationships, and have an information sharing platform, which we do, the Disturbance and Conservation Collaborative, sorry, space out there, which is our formal communication venue for the FCRP. We meet bi-weekly. We have presentations on ongoing research, but during this thermal stress and high water temperature period, we also have check-ins to say, hey, what are you seeing on the reef? Can you tell us what resources you need? How can the FCRP be of service to you? And as Laura mentioned, there's a lot of monitoring that's happening. So we also connect with partners up and down the reef to make sure that they are providing us their current conditions reports about what they're seeing. We're posting them on our website. We're emailing them to the folks in our community to make sure that they are aware as well. So this information that we're gathering from the network is really driven by them and their eyes in the water, and we're utilizing that and providing it back to the larger community.
Thank you so much, Allison. I think I speak for all of us, the panelists and all of our listeners. We're so grateful that you're here. It's very clear that you and your organization play a really critical role in all the work that's happening. So thank you again for being here. And just a time check for all our panelists, we are perfectly on time. So it's 6:30 and we're moving on to our second topic of the evening. We've talked about the status of our corals and our bay, and now we're going to pivot to talking about what's affecting them, what's actually affecting their health and well-being. So, Brian, I'm going to start with you. I understand that you lead a group of scientists that are modeling water temperatures and water quality to understand how those two things are impacting the reefs. Can you tell us a little bit more about the collaborative, what you guys do, your goals, and anything you want to share with the public?
Sure. Thanks, Loren. Yeah, we're in Southeast Florida, we're really data rich. We have many people doing so much work and so much data being collected. Laura presented on the tons of information that is coming out of Miami-Dade County, and equally DEP and EPA and other groups are funding tons of information that's being collected. And so this group of scientists utilizes that information to try and understand the connections between the land and the temperatures and the health of the reefs, to understand how we can possibly, mitigate some of these activities. Next slide. So within this work that we've been doing is a lot of disease intervention. And when we do disease intervention on corals throughout our region, we revisit these corals every month to make sure that they're healthy, that the disease interventions worked. And then we're able to calculate the amount of disease those corals get through time. And when we do that, it turns out that we see these patterns of disease where they become cyclical. And so corals get disease more often in certain times of the year and less often other times of the year. And so we wanted to understand that relationship by evaluating it statistically to look at temperature and water flow and rainfall in the region. Next slide. And when we do that, we found that over 66% of the amount of variation in these disease over time with these corals can be explained by temperature, water flow in our canals, and daily rainfall. And so by far, temperature is the biggest explainer of the data, which means that as temperature goes up, you get more disease. And that makes sense because that's what we see in the summertime. We get a lot more diseased corals than we do in the wintertime. But also, it's not just temperature. There's a spatial aspect to it, and that spatial aspect appears to be related to the flow of our water out of our canals and out of our inlets. And so when we have heavy rains, when we have higher flow through the canals, the corals tend to get sicker. And we also have done other studies where we measure the nutrients on the reefs, and those also go way up when you have heavy rainfalls. Next slide. And here's an example of that. If we look at all the corals in our database and when they got diseased, and then we track back from when they got diseased, where that water came from, the upper left panel shows that by far and away, government cut is the source of most of the water that those corals experienced 7 days before they got sick with the disease. So this is an indicator to us that we have a spatial component. It may be, originated in government cut or somewhere in Biscayne Bay that needs to be addressed. And so this is the idea behind our work, to try and identify those sources. Next slide. But what this brings to you, if you remember what I was talking about before, where we have all this heat in the south, and these corals are bleaching and experiencing extreme heat in the Keys, and there might be a sort of a refuge here in Southeast Florida. To the north, the corals can't just expand to the north because there's upwelling, there's colder weather, there's colder temperatures in the wintertime. It limits the corals' expansion to the north. So we really have a sweet spot here in Southeast Florida, pretty much West Palm through Miami-Dade, where we actually have a place where corals could thrive in future warming scenarios. The problem is that the water that we're pumping into the system is impeding that survival, right? It's stressing them out. It's creating more problems and creating an environment that's not conducive to them. It's more conducive to algae, so we get algal blooms and that sort of thing. So I guess the importance here is to understand that what we have that's coming out of our inlets really matters in terms of not only the reef health here, but could matter in terms of the reef health throughout the whole reef system. Next slide. And so my pitch to everyone, and I think this group already knows it because they've been working so hard on trying to do this, is to save the reef, we need to fix the bay. And, mitigating pollution in Biscayne Bay is one of the most effective levers we have, because that water doesn't stay in the bay. It comes out and it goes up north, and it affects a large portion of the reef tract. So let's reduce our pollution, save the reefs. Next slide. But an encouraging side of that is our modeling has shown that the nutrients offshore have actually started to taper off. So these graphs are different nutrients that we've measured offshore. And when we account for the rainfall and the flow and all these things that affect those data, we can see the actual signals in the data. And we see that they were rising steadily from 2018 through 2021, 22. They've tapered off in many cases. In most cases, so what that means is that we are not seeing increases in nutrients on the reefs anymore, which could indicate that we've had some mitigation, and some of the work that we're doing is actually having an effect offshore. Next slide. And one of those things that really matches up well with the timing are the fertilizer ordinances. In Miami-Dade County adopted this fertilizer ordinance. I'm not going to go through all the details here, but I do provide it here for people to please take a screenshot and follow it. But it seems that after these ordinances were adopted, we started to see some effects. And maybe it's a coincidence, but it's a happy coincidence, so we'll take it. So kudos to everyone for that. And I think that's all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walker.
Yeah.
And certainly from the Miami-Dade County team, thank you for the shout out for on our fertilizer ordinance. We're pretty proud of that one. Okay, so I'm going to move us back to the county team, to Laura. Laura, of course, as you lead, our DERM team is constantly monitoring the health of our bay, and we use that information to release our annual Biscayne Bay report card, which I will add was an initiative pushed through by then County Commissioner Daniella Levine Cava, now of course Mayor. So Laura, can you tell us what are DERM's water quality, seagrass, and coral monitoring programs telling us now about the health and resilience of the ecosystems in the bay?
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. As you can see, the Biscayne Bay Annual Report Card is a wonderful product. We're super happy to be able to produce this every year since 2019 so that the public can see what our efforts are doing. To focus a bit on the bay here and walk through a little bit of this graphic, it's representation of the overall health of Biscayne Bay. So it's considering both water quality and habitat quality indicators. And that's split up amongst these 9 different polygons, or what we call nutrient regions. And then we identify them with a stoplight score. So a red, yellow, or green score based on results of the county's analysis from my team's annual monitoring data. And next slide. So if you tab through the top, you'll see you can move to a couple different sections and learn a little bit more and delve deeper into the monitoring data. So like specifically Biscayne Bay's benthic habitat monitoring program. Like I said, it's been around since the 1980s. It's a major contributor to the report card. Staff sample about 450 sites annually in order to map seagrass and benthic resources, including sponge resources. The last few years, staff have developed a rapid response protocol to survey blooming harmful macroalgae species, like the one I was talking about earlier off Coral Gables. It's Anadiamene. So we're seeing this area unfortunately expand in its footprint in the bay. The harmful macroalgae is growing. Offshore, we also have a macroalgae bloom. That species is called Caulerpa. We're still questioning whether that is harmful itself, but it is a native species that we can see on our reefs. Additionally, and unfortunately, we do also have a new threat in the bay, and that is the invasive seagrass, Halophila stipulaceae. Our spatially rigorous database is helping to find its presence and sometimes, more importantly, its absence. This effort is highly collaborative with DEP, FIU, FWC, amongst other surveying partners. But I don't want to end on this slide. It's not all doom and gloom. We have seen increasing seagrass within North Biscayne Bay, and that is really telling a great story of recovery after a seagrass die-off event that occurred in the late 2010s. So this is wonderful news. And I want everyone to remember that the bay can restore itself when we support it, especially through restoring water quality. And next slide, please. So DERM does water quality monitoring, as we've mentioned. It maintains its robust surface water quality monitoring program since 1979. In the last few years, we've increased our sites to 30%, and we now conduct these monthly assessments across 137 sites throughout the county. So you can see those in the little diamonds. So this database is a big provider, not only for water quality restoration efforts and the Biscayne Bay report card, but as we mentioned, and thanks to the leadership of Mayor Levine Cava, as well as the Board of County Commissioners, we've also had guidance from staff and our Watershed Management Advisory Board members. We're actually on our way to achieve water quality restoration through a reasonable assurance plan. We're going to be addressing nutrient loading into Biscayne Bay that impacts our water quality, not just on our bay, but also offshore where our corals live as well. And next slide. So a little bit about what we are seeing, what some of that data looks like. So starting on the left, this is from our surface water quality monitoring program. We have some salinity and nutrient data from June. You can see that here. Hot off the press data, we do also have July salinity. We are seeing slightly higher salinity values within Northern Bay, so likely due to lower flows from rainfall, lower canal discharges, meaning less freshwater inputs to the bay or the North Bay. On the very far right, we can see total phosphorus. We have our highest areas, those in the yellow, around Coral Gables Waterway, Miami Beach, Biscayne Canal, and Snake Creek in the Oleta River area for both June and July, even though you're only seeing June here. And in the middle. So that's chlorophyll A. It's a kind of microalgae. It's a species that, generally speaking, loves to eat phosphorus. So it is what's blooming when we see our blue bay waters turn green, and why we see the arrows in yellow on our middle and our right graphics here. Both kind of correlate. So we're seeing our phosphorus values correlate with our chlorophyll values. Next slide. So how do we dive a little bit deeper into that? So looking left on the surface readings, the graphs on the right are the bottom readings. I know this can be a little confusing. You know, Brian mentioned spaghetti, right? I know we're at dinner time, but let's walk through it a little bit. So the black line that you're seeing is actually our historic temperature averages across all years. So that's typically what we've seen over time. But in 2023, which was our highest historic averages at the time, and then also including our worst bleaching year, that's the red line that you're seeing there, and you're seeing it kind of sustain itself. So Brian and I talked a little bit about, it's not just the temperature data that the corals are experiencing at one point in time, but that continuation over a period of time. And we see that in the red line for June, July, and September. When we're looking at the blue line, which is this year, we can compare not only to what we've seen in the past, but what we've seen on our worst year in red. The yellow dot is telling you what temperature values we saw just last week during our monthly monitoring. And then we have the surface readings on the left and the bottom, like I said. On the right, the bottom reading is really telling, because that's what our seagrass, our sponges, our lobsters, our crabs, all of our bottom dwellers are actually, including our corals, are living in. The graphic down at the bottom, the table you can see, is really turning that into numeric values. So comparing July to August, both surface and bottom for 2023, like we said, what we're considering kind of our worst year here in comparison to 2026. So you can actually see that, if anyone's interested, that for our August values in 2026, we're actually seeing a little bit of a decrease. Now, remember, this was just one date in time, or 1 month in time. We sample across 4 days each month, and we're averaging that together. So we do know, of course, that temperatures are ephemeral. They can change from day to day. But based on what we think and what we're seeing more, what our bay is experiencing, July temperatures around 89 or 88, August and 86. So it's a little bit promising. And I just wanted to kind of call out a little bit more of the data. We may not see this extend completely. Of course, as Brian stated, we're expecting this to be our highest, but it's nice to see that at least within bay waters, we're seeing some decreases.
Thanks so much, Laura. And to close out this topic, we're going to turn it over to Dalton. Dalton, if you could please tell us, what are you seeing about what's, impacting the health of our bay and our corals? What are your best estimates?
Yeah, you've heard a good amount now about the local stressors. And I think that that's kind of the unique thing that I want to emphasize for all the audience members tonight, is that Miami-Dade County, South Florida to a degree, should be considered ground zero for the coral crisis, because we not only have the global stressors facing corals, that we haven't talked as much about, ocean acidification and coral bleaching, but we have these local stressors that, Dr. Walker and Laura talked about. So you can imagine that those things in combination are what have us so alarmed and have caused such dramatic coral decline in a relatively short amount of time. You can look back to about the 1960s when coral cover and health was, at a stable state. And so since, it's been a very slippery slope because of those locals and global stressors. So, our team obviously monitors that very closely and tries to embed that in our research. But I think the way I like to look at that is if we know we are ground zero for the coral crisis, that then gives us the charge, the responsibility to be leaders in research, restoration, and conservation, because the solutions that we're identifying here, and we are identifying solutions, they're applicable anywhere. Truthfully, I don't say this to be dramatic. The world is watching Florida. There is a global coral reef conference just last month, and Florida and the Caribbean, to an extent, are some of the most prominent scientists globally, because we're unfortunately further down the road than other regions. So I think Miami has an incredible opportunity to be the leader that they are when it comes to conservation, water quality, coral research, and restoration. So just proud of all the efforts that we've already seen, and potentially the corners that we're rounding. Again, Dr. Walker's research he showed there means it might be working. Plateauing is amazing. I think the next step is to bring some of these stressors down, because you can imagine how effective all of our restoration efforts would be if we actually reduced, ocean warming, if we curbed water pollution. So that's why we remain optimistic.
Thanks for that, Dalton. And certainly appreciate just the reframing of what is for sure a huge regional challenge for us, but is instead to a huge opportunity to potentially lead on a global stage. So thank you for that. I think we'll stick with you, Dalton, to shift us into the next topic, to our third topic. And I will tell our panelists we're a few minutes over. So our third topic is, how are we responding to this summer's heat effects? So like I said, Dalton, I'll start with you. Your team has been doing lots of important efforts, lots of important work to protect corals. Can you share just a little bit more about what you guys are doing and what the impact is here locally?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, we've been busy, to say the least. It's really all hands on deck right now, because we're going to use as much of the information as we have to protect the corals that we've been gardening and restoring. So when it comes to our coral nurseries, 2023 was a tough lesson. So we had already worked between then and now to rethink how we grow these corals offshore when they're exposed to heat stress. So some of the simplest things we can do is lower all of our coral trees. You can see one of the coral trees there in the top left, so that they're as low as possible in the water column to try and buffer them from the light and heat stress. We actually built a brand spanking new nursery that is specifically in deeper water, about 50 to 60 feet. Not necessarily to grow them. They're not going to grow as fast in that water, but again, to protect them from these warming oceans. And so it's kind of a fail-safe. But we've even taken a step further. A few weeks ago, some of you may have seen headlines about coral scientists rescuing corals. That was us essentially identifying the most critical individuals in our nurseries and physically removing them from offshore to house them on land, to essentially create an ark where we knew at least one of all of those individuals was safe and secure on land, where we can control the water temps and light. So those are pretty drastic measures, but truthfully, that's kind of the extent of it. We can't really do much more to protect the ones offshore. That really is something we need societal action for, that we'll talk about in a little bit. But in terms of the restoration and the research, we're doing a lot of really exciting, innovative things with collaborators that are on this call. One of the projects is called the Florida Reef Hub. It essentially brought together all of the best and brightest in Florida that are working on coral science and reef restoration to make it as collaborative and large scale as possible. So one of the key things I wanted to feature that was really groundbreaking work is, for the first time ever last year, we were able to outplant corals from other regions in the Caribbean. Which might not sound like a big deal, but it is a huge deal. It took us a long time to even be able to just move corals across county lines. We can do that obviously now, but the reason we're so excited about having the ability to work with corals from other regions, specifically in Honduras, is that those corals are more regularly exposed to slightly warmer waters. So they're a bit tougher. They're a bit more climate ready, more heat ready. So Dr. Andrew Baker here at the Rosenstiel School and his Coral Reef Futures Lab are at the forefront of that, where they actually work to reproduce using coral parents from Florida and coral parents from Honduras to make quote unquote Flanduran baby corals that are, again, hopefully heat tolerant. And I'm thrilled to say that after, again, a monumental outplanting last summer before that coral bleaching event, these corals were just monitored about 2 weeks ago and are still showing very good signs of health. So that's kind of the future of reef restoration is, again, identifying which individuals and genotypes and locations are producing the best of the best so that we can ensure we are gardening and restoring those so that the reefs we're rebuilding with our hands are a bit more ready for these heat events that we're seeing more regularly. The only other thing I wanted to touch on is that we're also thinking kind of high in the sky. We're working with the sanctuary and some students here at the University of Miami on projects like Canopy, where during these kind of critical time points, is there a way to actually shade these corals by deploying essentially big floating umbrellas over reefs or nurseries to try and give them just a little bit of relief? But all of that is to say that, again, everyone's putting their head together. Different disciplines are coming together in terms of engineers, architects, coral scientists to really prepare ourselves for what's ahead.
Thanks so much, Dalton. I actually love the sort of comparison to a small arc. It sort of speaks to the gravity of the issue that you all are working to solve. So thanks for that. Now we'll move over to Dr. Walker once more. Dr. Walker, you've also been doing really important disease intervention activities, and we were hoping that you could share just a little bit more about what you're seeing on your end.
Sure. As a response to the heat in the summer, we know that disease goes up as the summer gets warmer and it gets rainier. And of course, we're seeing that this year as well. So our goal is to get out and do a lot of disease interventions in that heat stress period. Unfortunately, the interventions that we have at the moment are antibiotics, and antibiotics aren't well received in terms of using them in the environment. So this year, we've set out to test some non-antibiotic solutions to disease interventions. And we started that off by doing some work in the British Virgin Islands of a student of mine, Tristan Backel. Next slide. So basically, we go out to a coral and we find the disease lesion and we put this paste on it and we see if it works or not. And the antibiotic was like 80% successful. So 80% of your lesions are going to stop. That'll keep that coral survive long before it gets disease again. And so that was really a benefit of that because we can keep these corals alive much longer. And we're doing that now actively in Southeast Florida with our largest corals. But we wanted to see if we could test these other solutions. Next slide. So there are two solutions that have been developed by this group called Ocean Alchemists, who developed the first one as well. And these solutions are natural based. The first one is a blend of natural ingredients that have antibacterial properties. And so it's okay. It's not antibacterial itself. And then this other one is a formulation that also uses chlorine as a I don't know what to say. Whatever. Next slide. So we deployed these in British Virgin Islands. I believe it was last February. He went out and found 48 colonies and did a little experiment to test across these different treatments. Next slide. And what we found was astonishing, right? After 3 months of monitoring, the two treatments, which are the light blue and the yellow shaded groups, both had significantly less lesion progression, which is the lesion stop, basically. So those treatments worked, whereas the corals that didn't receive any treatment kept dying. And they actually, when he went back, a lot of them had already died. So it's very encouraging to know that we have this new technology that we can use. Doesn't employ antibiotics. Next slide. So this summer we're testing it now currently in Southeast Florida. A lot of folks have said there's no disease. We went out this past week to 2 sites off Fort Lauderdale and found 42 colonies to treat. We treated 14 with one application, 14 with another, and we left 14 alone. And he's going to study those corals for the next 3 months to see how that works out. But we're really hoping that this works and we can proceed with a non-antibiotic solution, and that would enable us to scale this up to what we were doing before with antibiotics, but the state won't have heartburn over it. So fingers crossed. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Walker. That's really cool. You guys are applying, you guys are like little healers running around looking for these corals who are sick and in need of medicine. That's really very cool. The visuals help really tell the story, so thank you. And Allison, I will turn to you to close out this section with a lot of the important work that you guys are doing. So I'm hoping that you could please share more about how Florida is preparing and responding to extreme heat and increased water temperatures.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Dalton and Brian, for all the incredible work that you are doing as well and are sharing with the community. So before I talked a lot about collaboration and communication, and this is where it especially gets important. So one of the ways Florida's Coral Reef Resilience Florida's Coral Reef Resilience Program is preparing or has prepared for this year's significant heat stress is we have created a thermal stress preparedness and response plan. I know, crazy that it didn't exist before, but this was asked for by our community members and recognized as something essential. Because in the middle of a crisis, no one wants to go digging through emails to find what meeting they should attend. No one wants to go, clamoring on different calls and going up their institutional chain to see what different activities they need to do or can do, right? This is a crisis. And so people want to be prepared. They want to be informed and they want to have actions available at the ready. So our thermal stress preparedness and response plan is literally intended to be a one-stop shop for people working on the reef, as well as the FCRP, something they can turn to before, during, and after to find those resources, right? Points of contact for emergency space, should they need it. For emergency funding, should they need it. The way this document is broken out is the first half is very short, very action oriented, to tell people, okay, if this is what agency or group you fall under, here's a checklist of things you should be doing before, during, and after an event. And one of the greatest important things about this is that it is a living document, right? This document has also been collated with a very large and robust appendix from lessons learned over the years. So we, the FCRP, are not just going in and telling people, hey, you should do this. No. This document was created literally on behalf of the Bryans and Daltons and Lauras of the world who are doing the monitoring, who have done and seen what works and what doesn't work. And we're sort of trying to collate that all into one document to say, here are some resources and tools that we can do for this year. And then in the spring, this document will be revised to update more lessons learned, as the science emerges, as people learn more from operational experience. And all of this is to say that the information here is really important and will be continually ever changing. And it can be incorporated so that we are prepared for whatever's next.
Thank you so much, Allison. I myself, I'm not sure that I knew that we had the statewide thermal stress preparedness and response plan. That reminds me a lot of the extreme heat action plan that we have here at the county. It's basically what to do, or a hurricane plan. It's basically what to do when you're actually experiencing the environmental hazards. So thank you for your leadership in putting that together. Okay, so to our panelists, we are about 10 minutes behind now. So I'm going to ask that we be a little brief with this last section, our last topic. But it is very important. And I will say a lot of the questions that we got from the audience as they registered and our panelists, and our registrants that are listening live were about this topic. So find a compromise, guys. What can people do to help? That's what a lot of folks want to know. This is, of course, a global issue. People are really interested in it, but they want to know what it is that they can do to actually make the situation better. So, Laura, I'm going to start with you. How can our residents here in Miami-Dade County get involved with DERM and Miami-Dade County to help?
See something, say something, right off the bat, We have several different ways which you can get in contact with us. You can email us, baywatch@miamidade.gov. You can call the DERM Environmental Complaints line with the phone number there. 24/7. You can dial 311 directly and release us and reach us as well. And this can be for a myriad of issues that you're seeing, not just things related to fish kills. If you see something on the street, if you see something in your backyard, an issue with a bird, if you're questioning what's going on with this manatee, you have the capability to reach us, and we want you to know that we are here to respond. Next slide. The county also maintains an online interactive reef and buoy finder tool. You can use the QR code. This really helps educate boaters by providing GPS coordinates, general information about buoys, artificial reefs, and wrecks. We have over 300 of them here in Miami-Dade County. It's important because as a boater, as a diver, you need to have access in order to experience these reefs, to love them like we do. We want to make sure that you have that education there so that there is a strong balance between the recreational use and the capacity for our reefs to thrive. Anchors can be very harmful to coral reefs and other hard-bottom species. That's due to repeated throws, or what we like to call death by 1,000 cuts. Use this resource in order to know that, and feel confident that even if you can't see the bottom, if you're in deeper waters, you know that you're not throwing anchor over reef and damaging it. Next slide. We also have an adopted buoy program, and all of this comes out of what we call our mooring buoy program as a whole that's managed within the offshore team within my staff. It was established after the Council of Coastal Mayors and the town of Golden Beach came together to pass resolutions actually requesting that the county initiate a pilot program. It was unanimously supported by the county commissioners at the time. So in 2009, with additional input from fishers, divers, nonprofits, you here listening today, the first buoys were installed. And the program now has 54 mooring buoys across 14 sites, and that's from Golden Beach all the way to Key Biscayne. So one thing I can tell you, just generally talking about corals and other benthic resources, watch your anchor throws, please. It is illegal to damage corals. You should also not be dropping your anchors in seagrass beds. You should be properly trimming your engines when you're in shallow waters to make sure you're not damaging those seagrass resources. And please just overall protect our reefs, protect our bay. They are yours as well.
Thanks so much, Laura. Here at the county, we like to say boating responsibly, when you're doing that, you're protecting not only other boaters, but you're also protecting the natural environment. So thanks for that perspective. Allison, I'm going to turn it back to you. What can people do statewide, not just people here in Miami-Dade County, to help solve this problem?
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. So the QR codes here kind of echo some of the ones that Laura had just shared, but the biggest one I would like people to focus their attention to is the CFAN, SEAFAN. This is a place, stands for a Southeast Florida Action Network. It's a reporting system, much like Laura said, where any community member, you don't have to be trained, can report what they're seeing on the reef. So whether it's a healthy coral, a diseased coral, something that looks fishy, pun intended, you can definitely report it there. I also encourage you, if you want to learn more, get more fully trained and do different, observations and monitoring, you can check out some of the other QR codes as well. And I also want to give a plug to our institutions, counties, local government here. Because oftentimes when we talk about crises and what folks can do, it falls a lot on the citizens. Sometimes monitoring. If you're already out there and can report, that's super great. But what we really need is institutional, maintained support financially and otherwise for the activities that are happening in Florida's backyard, right? So over the last few years, the state has made significant investments in Florida's coral reef, whether that's through the Biscayne Bay water quality improvement grants or through initiatives like Florida's Coral Reef Restoration and Recovery Initiative, or FCR3. So FCR3 is an initiative that's focused on scaling up the capacity and land-based infrastructure and logistics needed to conduct coral propagation, growing of corals, and helping to restore the reef, right? Maintaining that momentum is imperative if we want to see those restoration efforts reach their full potential and see all of the benefits from the activities that we've been working on here today. So if you want to learn more, you should definitely check out fcrrp.org. That is where we have housed the Thermal Stress Preparedness and Response Plan. We give updates where you can click on these different links and go to monitoring. And there are some Q&A questions well about reaching out to your local officials, making sure that they support, these great initiatives in Florida. And as Dalton mentioned, Florida is a leader. People are looking to Florida for answers. And so we have to make sure that we have the support in our institutions and local governments to keep that momentum alive.
Thanks so much, Allison. That's just, again, your answers are so thoughtful and they really help to frame sort of the broader regional perspective of all the work that's happening right here, but how it really feeds into these much larger efforts that you all are working on and are able to manage statewide. So thank you. And Dalton, I'm gonna close this out with our formal line of questioning with you, and then we'll move to audience Q&A. So Dalton, how about sharing something that you think people can do that supports the incredible work that the University of Miami is doing?
Well, the great news is that they can literally join us offshore to help restore local coral reefs. I kind of mentioned this morning, our rescue reef program had a group of divers and snorkelers on the boat with us to learn about coral reefs, why they're important, but then how we actually work to restore them. And so you help garden the corals, maintain the nursery structures, and then actually plant corals back onto local coral reefs. So here you can see some of our community scientists or citizen scientists in action. And the reason we felt that was so important is because the research and the restoration give us hope and information, but to really actually have success is going to require societal and political support. So the best way we thought we could do that is opening up the doors to our lab. So our coral restoration lab has a really robust education, outreach, and community science program so people can get involved. They can help in a lot of different ways. So if anyone here tonight hadn't heard of Rescue Reef before, we are your friendly neighborhood coral planter. So we would love to connect with you. We'd love to have you on the boat. And as a huge thank you for tuning in on a Friday night, you are going to be the first to hear that our next public coral restoration event is on Friday, August 28th. So if you're on our email list, you'll be among the first to know. You can circle that in your calendars. Madam Mayor, if you're interested in coming in the boat, I can probably save you a spot. You let me know. But in all seriousness, our expeditions are really fun, really educational, and impactful. But another thing we emphasize is that there's so much you can do on land. If anything, tonight's talk kind of reaffirmed that there's a ton we can do to protect corals from our own communities. And that's really where we see the needle move. So if anything, I would just encourage people to start somewhere, especially if tonight inspired you, is that every individual makes a difference all the way up to the community, city, and county level. So grateful for all these conversations and an enthusiasm from you all. If tonight was particularly up your alley, you're a coral lover, actually right around the corner here, the Frost Science Museum is hosting their annual Reef Florida Symposium, where all of South Florida's researchers are going to be giving the most up-to-date information on the research and the restoration. So that would be a great time to learn some more too.
Thanks so much, Dalton, and thank you for closing us out on the moderated Q&A on such a high note. And with that, we will shift us to the audience Q&A. I have been texted a number of questions. It's a good mix of what was submitted through registrations and some of the questions that we're seeing in the chat. So if you see me looking at my phone, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to start with one question that I'm hoping each of our panelists can respond to. So one of our listeners would like to know, where are the biggest gaps in resources right now and how are they being addressed? I think we've heard a lot about so much that's happening in this space. Where do we need to either invest or connect the dots or encourage more collaboration? Dr. Walker, I'd like to start with you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just thinking of that. It's interesting because the state has actually done a good job of pumping in money over the past really 10 years into helping to solve the water problems. But with that, there's gaps, of course. I think the number one problem that if you ask most people, fishermen, divers, anyone out there, number one problem of the reef is water quality, right? It's the clarity of the water, it's what's in the water, what's coming out of our inlets. And I think that is the biggest problem that we need to solve in the long run. And it's a massive problem because it really requires infrastructure changes, right? It requires you to go back and rebuild storm drains. And of course, a lot of cities are already finding, sea level rise to be a massive problem and having to raise their infrastructure. But I guess if I had to say where the gap is, I'd say that could be a pretty big one because the problem is so massive and so expensive.
Thanks for that, Dr. Walker. Any of our other panelists want to answer that one?
Yeah, I'll go. Thanks, Loren. Brian took mine. I was going to say funding, but he's right. There has been an immense amount of money put into Florida's coral reef as well as Biscayne Bay over the years. And as I mentioned, to reach all those goals, to continue having the wonderful resources that we do, that momentum needs to continue. So the other gap that I'm seeing and working in the coordination realm is a communication issue, right? But something is big as Florida's coral reef, which stretches roughly 360 miles across different counties and different seascapes. You have Keys, like the Keys reefs look different than Martin County's reefs. It's really a communication issue, in the sense that trying to make all these overlapping pieces fit together and communicate that in a cohesive way that is easy to understand who's doing what, that when, is a great challenge. And everyone is doing so much great work. I think it's going to be on all of us to work to make sure that we have like cohesive messages. We're saying the same things while also being able to talk about our individual work at the same time. And so I think, especially with regard to funding, and making all these connections between partners, cohesive communication is going to be a huge part of that.
Thanks for that, Allison. Dalton, I was going to ask if you or Laura wanted to respond.
Yeah, I kind of want to just build off of what those two said because they really nailed it on the head in terms of the high priorities, the gaps. But I think the other thing is just to reconnect people with coral reefs. Some of the state's own research showed that 66% of Floridians have never seen a coral reef, which is a travesty. It is legit a national treasure. And so we need to think about how to invest in creating that connectivity, that sense of place and ownership and responsibility. So, not just Rescue Reef, but there's more than a handful of organizations that are trying to better bridge that gap between community members and coral reefs. Because I promise you, anyone that has been able to go and explore on snorkel or scuba, they get it. They know how important these ecosystems are, the beauty, the aesthetic. We've gotten a lot better at communicating the economic value. I mean, Florida's coral reef is worth $8 billion per year in goods and services. So, that garners some attention. But I think we need to be at the grassroots level too, thinking about as a city and a county, how do we better connect community members to this amazing resource?
Thanks for that, Dalton. Laura, I was going to say, before you answered that, my next question was specifically for you. But if you want to answer this one.
Okay. Well, if it's very different, I mean, of course, state funding, like Allison and Brian said, that's great. And I was thinking, similarly to Dalton, everyone out there can really make a difference. Not only in reporting what you're seeing, when we had COVID and everybody was kind of locked in, looking out a window, I started calling everybody balcony biologists. People were reporting things on massive numbers. We were learning about particular species movements for threatened and endangered species, manatees, sea turtles, small-toothed sawfish, in areas that we didn't know because people hadn't seen them because they weren't forced to sit inside and look out their window. Another thing that we really see is the unfortunate nature of marine debris especially fishing debris, really impacting our reefs. So I would say if you have the capability within your community to invest the time to educate others, collaborate together, if you have the capability in your recreationally trapping within Miami-Dade, make sure that you're properly coming back and disposing of those, especially if they're getting a little bit moved due to storms or unfortunate intentional kind of vandalism. Try to make sure you're recovering them. They do immediately impact the area. They can wrap around our protected species, especially important locations and sites. So really try to hit the removal of unfortunate marine debris from our reefs. And that can be even at a street level. Keeping your leaf material out of your storm drains, pollutants out of your storm drains. A lot of people don't realize that the drains do go to the bay and then they hit our offshore waters.
Thanks for that, Laura. Okay, great. So now we've heard from each of our speakers. I'm going to move to a few direct questions. So this question I'm going to direct to either Dr. Walker or Dalton. I hope either of you can answer, or we'll open up to the full panel. One of our listeners wants to know, can coral be restored by increasing oxygen?
Well, typically we don't have oxygen depletion on the reefs, and so it's not an issue. What has been an issue this year is the sargassum hitting the shores, right? And when the sargassum is covering everything, it can create low dissolved oxygen levels as it disintegrates. But on the reefs themselves, we don't really have an oxygen problem with coral growing. It's more a turbidity issue and a temperature issue and getting outcompeted by other organisms that like the conditions better, basically. Yeah. And we're trying really hard to solve those issues.
And through like a coral restoration lens, because we're gardening these corals, we can use the science behind coral growth to try and accelerate it. So if you, in the simplest way, corals really need light for their energy, their energy source. And then they need certain elements that's kind of in the water column, the chemistry of it. So, in a lab setting, you can ensure your lights are as ideal as possible. And Dr. Chris Langdon at the Rosenstiel School looks at kind of the alkalinity of the water as well to see if that can promote corals' skeletal growth to essentially accelerate that. The other neat thing we can do is we can actually deliberately try and rear corals in tough environments because then, again, they're better equipped, better prepared for when you actually output on the reef where the conditions are maybe a bit better. So to a degree, the question I think is right in that there are strategies we can think about to optimize coral gardening and reef restoration for these scaling up these practices.
Thank you both for responding to our resident. The next question I'm going to pull. Okay, I'm going to ask Laura this question. Laura, what steps is Miami-Dade County taking to improve response times when residents report environmental crimes or pollution?
Yeah, like I said, we've got a multitude of ways in which you can try to reach us. You can also, email me directly. I and myself and other sections within our division are sometimes the people that are responding to particular types of emergency responses, sanitary sewer overflows, fish kills. If we're seeing manatee issues, we were out doing search patterns looking for an injured dolphin actually just yesterday. So we're hitting from that perspective. And so long as we can get safely out on the water or on lands with the proper amount of daylight, we can respond quickly. We do have thresholds in terms of the water quality bottles and the samples that we can collect within a particular day. So sometimes we have timelines in order to get them to the labs that actually can run those analyses. And we may not be able to get those samples to a lab that day. So we set ourselves up for success the next morning. When it comes to other types of complaints or other types of issues, they're going to be going to different sections, different DERM staff. So you're going to see them respond as quickly as they can. If you don't get a response immediately, definitely don't give up. We're here to respond back to you. And we want to make sure that, especially if something, is garnering a much larger response, like last at the first roundtable, Pamela talked about, like, we have different response protocols for different levels of fish kills, if it's a minor, a medium, or a major fish kill. And so we always want to make sure that we're getting back to you to explain how we responded. Sometimes we need the time to gather that data and analyze it so we can give you a proper accounting of what occurred. But definitely stay in contact with us. We're happy to tell you everything that we do. And we're just excited that you're here listening today and learning a little bit more. So please reach out.
Thanks so much, Laura. I'm looking at the time and realizing we're only going to have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask it, and I'm going to hope that each of our panelists will respond. I'm looking at my camera, and so I'll ask Dalton to start, and then we'll hear from Dr. Walker, then Laura, and we'll finish with Allison. So the question is, and if you need a second, Dalton, to start, that's okay. If you could implement one action today that would make Biscayne Bay and our coral reefs more resilient to extreme heat over the next 10 years, what would it be? What would it be?
Yeah, I'm probably going to steal Dr. Walker's answer because we really do need to think about our point source pollution that's ending up in Biscayne Bay, because it's clear it's having a really negative impact on the local reefs. And I'll let him elaborate, but I think people underestimate how close our coral reef tract is to Miami's coastline. Miami really should be the coral reef capital of the world, because we have this huge metropolis that you could almost throw a baseball to hit the coral reef. And that's rare. That's amazing, exciting. So it means that they are so closely connected. So I think that would be the one thing I would say we can do in the short term to have, a pretty dramatic positive impact.
Yeah, and Dawson, Dalton, I think you hit it on the head. The amount of pollution that's coming out of our inlets, especially Government Cut and pushing north across that entire reefscape is immense, and it's been having drastic effects for many years, and it's just gotten worse with the temperature stress and other factors. Like I presented, I think that we're in a really unique place where we're kind of buffered by that extreme heat of the South. But if we keep pumping all these pollutants into the water, it's an issue. So if I had that one magic solution, it would be to solve the water problem in Southeast Florida. Yeah.
Laura, how about you?
Ditto. The water quality is what these organisms are bathing in every single day. So it's that direct impact. It's a conveyance from potential microbial sources, disease sources, nutrient sources. So if you have the capacity to, like we were saying, like reduce your street side litter, reduce stormwater runoff. When you're fertilizing, make sure you're within the bounds of our fertilizer ban. Not doing that within the coastal edge, within particular months of the year, meaning the rainy season. So if it's raining a lot outside, you really don't want to be fertilizing your grass. Ensuring that your backyard doesn't slope back down towards your seawall, because you're then just driving the nutrients directly into the bay. We unfortunately see a lot of people set up illegal pipes in their backyard where they're emptying their pools directly into our canals and our bay. Septic to sewer conversions are a big piece of that. The state is really assisting. We've got a Biscayne Bay Water Quality Improvement Grant with millions of dollars that's coming into county, and we're administering those funds and getting those conversions out there. And like I mentioned earlier, the conversation that we've had with the state for several years really led the county to step up and make sure that we were initiating this water quality restoration practice, which I mentioned was the reasonable assurance plan. So we currently have our contractors modeling out what that means. It's taking 4 different models and pulling them together. And we're looking to have a plan to present to the state by the end of the year. And what that means is all of the 32 of the 34 municipalities that are co-permittees with us, they have to basically provide reasonable assurance that they're going to decrease their nutrient loading. And so we're doing green infrastructure upgrades and septic to sewer conversions, like I mentioned. So all of these are extremely impactful. The county's trying to make sure to work directly with the cities to lay the groundwork, get approval from the state on how we're going to move forward with this. But even like I said, right on your street level, you have an impact.
Thank you, Laura. And to close us out for the evening, Allison, if there was one thing that you could implement, what would it be?
Well, I do work closely with Brian and others on a few things, so I think he would be disappointed if I didn't say improving water quality. And kind of to echo everyone else and what Dalton had just said, folks don't realize how close Florida's coral reef is to Miami. And also, we need to be talking about this bigger ecosystem scale, right? Often we talk about Florida's coral reef, and then we talk about the Everglades, but really, it's all connected. It's all big one system. So if we can solve the water quality in one place, that helps everything across the entire ecosystem, not just Florida's coral reef.
Thank you so much, Allison. And thank you to all of our incredible panelists for joining this evening and sharing so much of your insight and your generous science and research. So thank you all. I'm going to ask our incredible Madam Mayor to please close us out for the evening.
Well, this has been extremely informative, inspiring, beautiful, with fantastic photos and graphs, and hopeful. I think we need to capture what we've learned today and in the first one, not only by allowing people to watch these Zoom videos, but to put together a synopsis of key takeaways, both information that is critically important, and I know there was so much, but keep it simple, and action steps and things that are most important for change. We've heard so much wisdom from this group. I personally didn't know quite a number. Of course, the science I don't know in detail, but apart from that, I didn't know about government cut being a critical culprit. Obviously, a lot of water comes from other places that flows through government cut, but that specifically that common pathway, that was very important. I didn't know that we were having success treating corals on site with antibiotics and not. And I didn't understand the full extent of the restoration of the reef work and that it was available for the public to participate. I think that's pretty darn extraordinary and fun. I think we have to make it digestible. We have to make it hopeful. And I'm sure with the people who took part today and the many others that I know are deeply, deeply engaged, we should have an education action plan that cuts across. And, I didn't really realize that we already had that effort that Allison described to be a clearing place. That really, I got into the corals business, if you will, because I was frustrated about all the many different approaches and how we stay aligned. Clearly, you all talk to each other, which is a great thing, but I think it needs to be something more deliberate and publicly facing than that. As far as the bay goes, I knew that seagrasses were doing better in the north end, not so much in the south end, but I didn't understand that we really can better pinpoint, and we are already making a difference because of the actions we've taken. We think we don't, as was said, we don't know exactly how to attribute it, so we'll take credit for reduction of nutrients flowing into our waterways. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for your incredible dedication, passion, and collaboration to make sure that we can continue to keep our paradise alive and thriving. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and to all of our panelists who joined us this evening. To any of our listeners, if you have additional questions or feedback, please email us at derm@miamidade.gov. And when you sign off, please take a moment to complete the brief survey at the end of the Zoom session. It helps us to know what is working and what isn't so that we can keep hosting these. So thank you all again, and to our Madam Mayor for hosting this fabulous event. Thank you all and have a safe evening.
Thank you too. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.